On board the American carriers, pilots made their final preparations. Many were nervous, especially on the Hornet. The Hornet's torpedo squadron had never gone into battle. Many of them had never taken off from a carrier with a torpedo, or a pickle as they called it, slung below them. Some had never even seen it done before. As they walked out towards their planes, the pilots must have had the words of their squadron leader still ringing in their ears. He had told them, "I want each one of us to do his utmost to destroy our enemies. If there's only one plane left to make the final run-in, I want that man to go in and get a hit. May God be with us all. Good luck, happy landings, and give 'em hell."
After completing an inspection of the aircraft and its bomb, I climbed into the cockpit, and as I sat there waiting for the signal to start engines, I suddenly got the same feeling of apprehension and butterflies in the stomach that I got before the start of competition in high school.
At 7 a.m., the launch began.
The pilots of the American Air Armada set off with little battle experience, limited fighter cover, and no margin for error. They were setting out across a vast stretch of ocean in small groups towards a deadly and experienced enemy.
If things were looking precarious for the Americans, back on Nagumo's carrier, the Akagi, events were beginning to get out of hand. Nagumo had been desperately waiting for his scout plane to tell him what kind of American ships it had spotted. Now, it gave him its answer. The enemy is accompanied by what appears to be a carrier, bringing up the rear. It was a staggering blow to Nagumo. He'd never expected an American carrier to be in the area so soon. Its presence now jeopardized his entire operation. Nagumo knew he had no option. He had to launch a strike at the American carrier. But this realization couldn't have come at a worse time. These are the Japanese carriers here. Just at the moment Nagumo was hearing about the distant American carrier, his Midway attack aircraft began to return. They were low on fuel, and they needed to land quickly. Up above them, his fighter planes were also anxious to land. Nagumo now faced a critical decision, which could win or lose him the coming battle. He still had his reserve planes sitting on his carriers, but not all of them were loaded with the anti-ship weapons he now needed to attack the American fleet. He could choose to launch an immediate limited strike with the few reserve planes that were ready before his Midway attack aircraft landed. Alternatively, he could delay launching, land the circling Midway attack force, and then launch all his reserve planes, which by then would be fully armed with anti-ship weapons. It'd be a big risk. It would take an hour or so, but at the end of it, he'd be able to launch one huge attack, sure to destroy the American fleet. And that is what he decided to do. He would land his Midway attack force and wait until all his reserve planes were rearmed so that he could deliver the killer blow. But Nagumo's plan was already going awry. Nagumo had based his decision to postpone launching his planes until they were all ready on information he'd received from his scout plane. His own fleet was here. The report from the scout plane put the American ships here. At this distance, Nagumo knew his carriers were out of reach of the American planes. The problem was Nagumo's scout plane was wrong. The American fleet was actually here, their planes within range. And unknown to Nagumo, American bombers from these ships were already on their way towards him.
At 9:20 a.m., the Japanese carriers were spotted by the inexperienced aircrew in the American torpedo bombers. Despite their limited training, they had no choice but to attack. The American pilots bravely held their course towards the carriers. They hunched low and prayed they'd make it through the storm of anti-aircraft fire coming from the ships. As they roared down towards the Japanese carriers, they were pounced on by a pack of patrolling Zeros. The lumbering American planes were no match for the agile Zeros. 35 of the 41 torpedo bombers were shot down above the Japanese fleet, most of them without even releasing their torpedoes. Those that did, missed. The attack had been a disaster. They'd failed to score a single hit.
Nagumo was almost ready to make his move. His deck crews had been working hard to rearm and refuel his planes. If they could be launched quickly, the Japanese would surely win the Battle of Midway. At 10:21 a.m., Nagumo and his men were still not quite ready to launch their planes.
At precisely that moment, American dive bombers like this one appeared high above the Japanese carriers, and their bomb run was clear. The Japanese fighters that should have dealt with them had been drawn off to attack the American torpedo planes. There was nothing to stop these dive bombers as they began screaming down towards the decks of the Japanese carriers.
A lookout screamed, "Hell divers!" I looked up to see 3 black enemy planes plummeting toward our ship. Some of our machine guns managed to fire a few frantic bursts at them, but it was too late.
There was no stopping the Americans now. 4 bombs ripped into the carrier Kaga. And another struck Nagumo's flagship, the Akagi. But even as the dive bombers were attacking the Kaga and Akagi, another group of American planes, these from the Yorktown, arrived from a quite different direction. The Japanese fighters, already overstretched by the first attacks, didn't know which way to turn. Within moments, these fresh American bombers dived on a 3rd Japanese carrier, the Soryu. They slammed 3 bombs into her. Relatively few bombs had been dropped by the Americans, but their impact was devastating. 3 of Japan's great carriers were destroyed.
On board the 3 Japanese carriers, there was chaos. Aircraft, fuel tanks, and ammunition exploded, sending fireballs and huge chunks of metal flying through the air. All 3 carriers were turned into flaming wrecks. Many of their crews suffocating in the smoke, trapped below decks that glowed red hot.
A gush of hot air washed over me. We were hit hard. As fire spread, heaps of bombs began to explode with shattering blasts. I could see, not far off, the Akagi and the Soryu. They too were aflame. It was a terrible scene.
Nagumo survived the attack on the Akagi, but was forced to abandon his burning flagship. In little more than 5 minutes, the Americans had struck